Week 8 of the fantasy football season, and here's quarterback start sits every matchup this week. The first one, Thursday Night Football. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Buffalo Bills. So Tampa Bay, they've been playing decent football so far this season. Baker Mayfield, he's been going out there and he's making plays. Him and Mike Evans have good chemistry and making plays all season long. Chris Godwin's starting to get more involved in the offense over the last few weeks. But this week here, what a tough matchup, and no teams on bye in normal formatted leagues, 10, 12-team leagues. Baker Mayfield really is an option versus this tough Buffalo Bill defense, and he's a sit. Josh Allen, we know he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Fantasy football each and every year, top 2, top 3 in putting up points. And so far this season, I know this Bill team really hasn't played great, but Josh Allen, besides one game, has been putting up numbers, and once again is a start and matchup proof here versus Tampa Bay. Next game, New York Jets, New York Giants. Obviously, both play at the same stadium, but it's a home game for the New York Giants. But in terms of these quarterbacks, there's no one I'm interested in. I think both defenses could have good games, obviously, in this one. So Zach Wilson, he's been improving a little bit, but he's still not throwing for touchdowns. He isn't turning the ball over, but he's not finding the end zone as Wilson. He hasn't been a fantasy option all year. In this game, maybe extra juice is flowing versus the New York Giants is definitely a possibility, but still, I can't have any confidence in Wilson. He's a sit. Now to the Giants, Daniel Jones, he's been horrible all season. He's banged up with a neck injury. We don't know for sure if he's going to play in this game, and even if he does, he's got a bad offensive line blocking for him, and this Jet defensive line, one of the better lines in the league. So Jones is a sit, and Tyrod Taylor, I know he's played good football for this Giant team over the last few weeks, starting for Daniel Jones and coming in relief a few weeks ago as well. But right now, Tyrod Taylor, I don't think he's a fantasy option as well. He's been a journeyman backup quarterback in the league over 10 seasons now. And right now, he's a sit. Now to the Los Angeles Rams at the Dallas Cowboys. Matthew Stafford, I know last week wasn't a good game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers for Stafford, but this week here, pretty much a must-win type of ball game for this Ram team, where it's getting late early, especially in that division, even though the Niners have lost 2 in a row. I think Stafford, he goes out there, he's had a good career versus the Dallas Cowboys, and he puts up numbers, especially with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. I know this Cowboy defense is a solid unit, but with receivers like that, it's hard for me to see them being bottled up 2 weeks in a row combined. I know Puka went for 154 yards last week, but Cooper Kupp didn't do much this week here. Even in the tough matchup, I think Stafford, relying on those 2 wide receivers, puts up numbers, and he's a start. Dak Prescott, he's a sit for me. Dak, I know he's had a couple decent games this season for fantasy football, but he's inconsistent. And this Cowboy team, obviously their offense isn't as high-powered as it was last season, where they were pushing the ball more down the field. Now a little bit more conservative and a lot of grinded-out type of drives where they're not finishing in the end zone while they're in the 20s. So right now, he's a sit. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Steelers. Trevor Lawrence, he's pretty much been an 18, 20-point fantasy guy each and every week. And I know this season, besides the top 7, 8 quarterbacks, a lot of inconsistencies, not a lot of guys putting up numbers. But this week here, very tough matchup versus one of the stoutest units in the league versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. TJ Watt, one of the best pass rushers in the league, got Minkah Fitzpatrick in the secondary, and this Steelers team pride themselves on defense and making plays. So right now, while this Jacksonville team's been a run-first team and scoring a majority of their points through Travis Etienne, I don't think Trevor Lawrence has a monster game. Once again, like I said, that 17, 20-point range, I could see him in. So he's borderline. Kenny Pickett's a sit for me. Kenny Pickett, I know he's got good weapons, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Warren out of the backfield, but he just doesn't put up consistent numbers. I've been waiting for the breakout now this season for Pickett, but so far, he's pretty much had one big ball game and the rest mediocre to poor outings. So this week, he's a sit. Now to the Texans at the Carolina Panthers. CJ Stroud, he's a start for me this week. We know Stroud, he's one of the younger quarterbacks in the league, but he plays like he's been around 5 to 8 seasons here, CJ Stroud. He's got good poise in the pocket. He knows where not to force it and to throw it away at times. And only 1 interception so far in the season. So this week here in a good matchup at a weak Carolina Panther team. And a matchup of early round picks in the last season's NFL draft with Stroud and Bryce Young. I think Stroud outplays Young in this one and is a start. Bryce Young's a sit for me. I know Bryce Young, he don't really have a lot of weapons on the offense over here for this Carolina Panther team. And obviously Adam Thielen is having a great season, but besides him, no one else has emerged and stepped up in the passing game. So Bryce Young, he might be undersized. A lot of people think so. He was the first pick overall, but so far CJ Stroud's definitely outplayed him. And he does have more talent around him. But this week here versus an up-and-coming Texan defense, I don't see Young being a viable fantasy option. Now, Patriots, Miami Dolphins, Mac Jones, he's a sit for me this week. I know last week Mac had a good game, and him and Kendrick Bourne to get things going and moving the football down the field. And Ramondre Stevenson, we know, is one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. But this week in a game where I think this Dolphin team, after a tough loss to Philadelphia, getting pretty much handled in that second half of the game, go off to a 10-14 point lead. They make this Patriot team one-dimensional, and they start teeing off on Mac Jones in this one. So he's a sit to each and every week. We know he's a start. We know he's an MVP candidate. I know last week it was a tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league, but Tua's going to bounce back, and I think he has a big game. Anywhere from 30, 35 fantasy points. Wouldn't be surprising. Falcons at the Titans. Desmond Ridder, he's one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league. It's pretty close between him and Zach Wilson, in my opinion. So Desmond Ridder, I know he can run the football a little bit. We saw he had a rushing touchdown in last week's game, but also saw he fumbled the ball at the 1 yard line as well, trying to run it in for a touchdown. So this week here versus a stout Tennessee defense at home, he's a sit. Now to the Titans, we don't know who's going to start a quarterback for sure. So I listed all three quarterbacks here. Ryan Tannehill, it's been a bad season for him once again. He's banged up with the ankle injury. We don't know if he's going to play. Malik Willis, he cannot throw the football. He's more of a gadget and a running type of quarterback. And Will Levis, he's been pretty much inactive the whole season, even though he was a high-touted prospect out of college this season, but fell in the NFL draft. But this Falcon defense has been pretty decent this season. So right now, none of these options intrigue me in this game. And all sits, so the Vikings at the Packers, so a division matchup, and Kirk Cousins last week, Monday Night Football, big-time game, 2-4. They needed that one without his number one wide receiver. And Cousins, he got the job done. Jordan Addison, he's emerging as a number one type of wide receiver. He had the monster ball game, over 25 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this week here versus a middle-of-the-pack Green Bay Packer defense, going into Lambeau Field, I think Kirk Cousins once again has a good game, and he's a start. And he's pretty much a locked-in start each and every week for the most part now. His cousin, Jordan Love, he's a start for me as well. Love, he's been pretty decent so far in his first year as a starter for this Green Bay Packer team. Pretty much his ceiling, though, has been 25 fantasy points this year. I know he's had a couple 19-point fantasy games, and he's coming off of one in last week's game. But the problem with the Pack is they trail in the last 3 weeks in these games early and have to play catch-up. But right now, Jordan Love had a decent game, like I said. Tough loss versus the Denver Broncos in last week's game at the end. But I think Love in this one versus a mediocre Minnesota defense is a start. Now it's the Eagles at the Commanders. Jalen Hurts, we know he's banged up a little bit with the ankle injury, but if he plays, you know he's a top 2, top 3 quarterback weekly at worst. Last week, a great game at the Miami Dolphins. He could do it all, can make all the throws, can run the football. That tush push at the 1 yard line's automatic. And this week here versus a Commander defense that really isn't that good, he's a must start. Commanders, Sam Howell, he's a sit for me this week. Howell, he's been pretty decent so far this season. But last week, where it looked like it was going to be a plus matchup for Howell, he just couldn't get the job done versus the New York Giants. And this week here with a Philadelphia defense improving and getting better as the season's going on, and now adding Bird to the secondary in a trade with the Tennessee Titans, I think they tee off on Sam Howell, even though Howell did have a good game in a lot of catch-up ball early in the season versus Philadelphia. But this week, I can't trust him with every team playing this week. He's a sit. New Orleans Saints at the Indianapolis Colts, both quarterbacks are borderline. Derek Carr, I know he's been getting passing yards over the last few weeks, but Derek Carr frustrated so far this season. Chris Olave, we don't know 100% if he's going to play in this game. He got arrested after riding his motorcycle over the speed limit earlier in the week. But if Olave's out of this game, then Derek Carr, he's a sit, obviously. But this Indianapolis Colts team, we know they're vulnerable giving up points. We saw it last week. They lost a crazy shootout, 39-38, to a Brown offense that was pretty much decimated with P.J. Walker in there. They had Jerome Ford get banged up. He left the game with injury as well. Even though I know the defense generated a lot of those points for Cleveland, still, I think Derek Carr, as long as Olave plays, could be a decent option. And he's borderline. Gardner Minshew last week, he did turn the ball over 3 times, but he also had a monster fantasy game, over 30 fantasy points. So right now, some solid weapons on this offense. Michael Pittman, we know he's a good wide receiver. Josh Downs, the rookie, he's emerged over the last 3 weeks of the season. He could run the routes, he could get the deep ball and burn the secondary. And this week here in a game where I think it could be a mini shootout once again in Indianapolis, I got Gardner Minshew borderline. Browns at the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know if Watson's going to play. We know he hurt his shoulder in last week's game and left early in the first quarter, but he's a sit for me. We just haven't seen much out of Watson this season. He's turned the ball over a lot, holding on to the football a lot as well, and he just really isn't an elite quarterback anymore like he was in the Houston Texan days. Obviously, a season off, almost 2 seasons off, honestly, for Watson. Didn't do him any good. See, he's a sit. PJ Walker, a sit as well. I know he was an XFL standout, but so far we saw him last season with the Carolina Panthers and a few games already this year with the Browns, and he pretty much only had one good game in a handful of starts. So right now versus a pretty decent Seattle Seahawks defense that could get to the quarterback and has a young secondary, but guys who are ball hawks and big play secondary type of players, he's a sit. Geno Smith is a sit for me as well. This season, we haven't really seen that huge game out of Geno Smith. I know last week he played a pretty good one, but that was versus one of the worst teams in the league in the Arizona Cardinals. So this week, Geno Smith versus a pretty solid Brown defense led by Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward in the secondary, and Zadarius Smith. I don't think I really could trust him in this one. And we saw it last week where they made Gardner Minshew turn the over a whole lot, even though he did score a lot of touchdowns. I think this is a game where Kenneth Walker they lean on a lot. And Geno's a sit. Chiefs at the Broncos, a matchup from a few weeks ago. Now these division rivals once again meet up here. Patrick Mahomes last week, he went off for his biggest game of the season, and he was due for that huge game. I know Mahomes, 25, 30 points weekly he was putting up, but last week over 40 fantasy points for Patrick Mahomes. And this week here at a Denver Bronco team that we know gives up a lot of points. We saw early in the season, Dolphins dropped 70 on them. And now Mahomes in this offense getting a little bit more comfortable. And Travis Kelce, he's taking it to another level right now for this Kansas City Chiefs team. And Rashee Rice has emerged as well. So with all those things lining up and Mahomes very familiar with this Bronco defense, he's a must-start, obviously, each and every week. And he'll be my number one quarterback in the rankings as well. Russell Wilson's a sit for me. Wilson got off to a good start the first month of the season, but the last few games now, he's come back down to earth, and he's pretty much a guy topping out at 15, 16 fantasy points is Russell Wilson. Jerry Jeudy hasn't done much for him this season. Courtland Sutton, he's been solid, no doubt about it. But besides that, wide receiver-wise, not much has happened. Marvin Mims, a couple games early in the season, but he's disappeared. Greg Dulcich once again on IR. And I know Perine and McLaughlin are decent receivers out of the backfield, but it's just not enough offense for Wilson to be a week in and week out option. And plus, this Kansas City Chiefs defense is playing great football, and they're locking up some good quarterbacks as well. Cincinnati Bengals at the 49ers. Joe Burrow, I think he's going to be close to 100% coming into this game. In the last 2 weeks before their bye week, Burrow put on big games at Arizona and then versus Seattle as well. So this week, I know San Francisco, one of the better defenses in the league. But the last couple weeks now, teams have been able to throw the football on this 49er team, and they've lost 2 in a row. We saw Kirk Cousins without Justin Jefferson throw for a big ball game on Monday Night Football in Week 7. And even in Week 6, PJ Walker, he hung in there and made some plays when they needed it. So Burrow's a start. Brock Purdy a start for me as well. I know versus the Browns, he had a bad game a couple weeks ago with Purdy. But on Monday Night Football, until he started forcing towards the end of the game to make things happen, Brock Purdy, he was on his way to having a good game. So I know Deebo Samuel, once again, most likely out in this one. But Christian McCaffrey, he looked pretty solid with the oblique injury, still playing through it. Had a receiving touchdown as well. George Kittle, 78 yards. A nice comeback game for him on Monday night at the Minnesota Vikings. And this week here in a potential shootout, I got Purdy as a start. Ravens at the Arizona Cardinals. Lamar Jackson, he's starting to kick things into gear and trying to get another MVP under his belt. So Lamar, we know he's one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the league. But now him and Mark Andrews are getting things going once again. And I said this a few weeks ago in my videos. Lamar, he just has to get back to basics and start looking for Mark Andrews more. And he did, obviously, in the last game. And they blew out a good Detroit team 38-6. So this week here with a great matchup at a weak Cardinal team is a start. Joshua Dobbs is a sit for me. I know the first few weeks Dobbs was playing good football, but the last 2 weeks we really haven't seen much out of him. Zach Ertz now placed on IR, another solid weapon he can't use, so he's a sit. And Kyler Murray, there's a possibility he could play in this game because now he's in the practice mode 21-day window, where last week he practiced, but obviously he didn't play. And this week I don't see him playing Murray, but by chance I have him on here, but I don't think he's ready to go, even if he does play versus a solid Baltimore defense. He's a sit. Now to the Bears at the Chargers, Sunday Night Football. Tyson Begnan, he looked pretty decent for this Bear team. I know it was a mediocre to poor Raider defense in week 7, but he can make some throws as Beckett. He's got some legs as well. He can run when he has to. And you got a good receiver in DJ Moore, and Deonta Foreman had that monster breakout game. So right now we know this Charger defense in the secondary gives up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks, but still on a Sunday night game, second career start, I'm not trusting Baggett, obviously, especially with every team playing this week. So he's a sit. Justin Herbert, bad game versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Got off to a hot start in that one, and then second half, nothing was going on for this Charger team. But this week here versus a bad defense, one of the worst in the league, he's a must start. And last game of the week, Monday Night Football, Raiders at the Lions. We don't know who's going to start this game. Garoppolo banged up with the back. He's been a turnover machine anyway this season, so he's a sit. Hoyer, he's shown nothing last week, and I don't know why they didn't just start O'Donnell as Chicago is this Raider team. But anyway, Hoyer, if he starts, he's a sit. And O'Donnell, he's more of an unknown and a guy with a higher upside, I believe, than a Hoyer and Garoppolo at this point. Working with a Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers as his wide receivers. But right now in a tougher matchup at Detroit, even though I know the Lions got the doors blown off last week, I think they bounce back in this home game, and all those quarterbacks are hit. And now Jared Goff last week was a tough week, no doubt about it. But Amon-Ra St. Brown still went over 100 yards. Goff still was moving the football, but they just couldn't punch it in the end zone. And that was the problem. And a couple key fourth downs they couldn't convert as well. But this week here versus a weak rated defense and a home game where Goff plays better at home in Monday Night Football, he's a start for me. So that's quarterback start sits every matchup for week 8 of the fantasy football season.